Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Patel Center for Science, Engineering, and Public Policy today. I am just delighted to welcome Jeff Lumpkin, him, who is a Seattle-born and based entrepreneur and business founder. After earning a degree in political science and Russian studies at Cornell, a master's degree in international studies from University of Washington, and an MBA from the University of Virginia, Jeff returned to Seattle, embarked on a long and varied tenure at Microsoft, making his way from the finance side all the way to product development, where he established himself as a master of complex data analysis and visualization. In 2021, Jeff combined his expertise in business and data analytics to found Veritas Maps. Veritas is built on more than 70 publicly available data sets and provides analytical platforms, largely in Power BI, to facilitate data-driven decision-making across a wide range of social, economic, and political issues. And all of that is very impressive. But I think the most fascinating thing about Jeff, and impressive thing about Jeff, is how much of the world he's seen and how consistently he's been dedicated to making exploration a part of his life. So we'll be sure to talk about that. So thank you and welcome, Jeff.
It's my pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the chance to speak with you and with your class.
Excellent. So I just teased it, but let's start with what strikes me as a very close relationship between your eagerness to understand others' experiences of the world, and the career that you've made for yourself. So one of the things I left out of your bio is that you lived in Kazakhstan,
Yep.
during which time you were studying the impact of oil on nation building in Central Asia, which is a very public interest technology thing to do, by the way. So
Right.
tell us a little bit about where that passion and curiosity came from for travel and exploration of the world.
Well, it originated quite early in my life. So I remember being a little kid, like maybe 5 or 6 years old, and my uncle gave a slideshow about the 2 years he spent in the Peace Corps in India. And that was in 1960 and 61. So it was very early on. What he showed me just opened my eyes up to the wonder and the variability that's found outside in the world. And from that moment on, I wanted to travel to other places. So that early spark I credit with giving me the inspiration to seek out new experiences. And my first experience overseas after that was I spent a month living in Japan with a family. And I had just had this passion for, well, Japanese food for one, uh, but also the history of Japan, the architecture, the aesthetics of it all appealed to me very much. And I dedicated myself from that point on towards traveling as much as I could and just immersing myself in cultures. So Kazakhstan came about because I was unemployed, and was having trouble finding a job that seemed interesting or exciting to me. So I went through this long process of kind of self-discovery and resolved to develop the skills necessary to have a career that would allow me to do fun and exciting things. And that led me to kind of back to what I'd studied in college, which was the former Soviet Union. So this was in 1993 when I started thinking about this quite seriously. And I focused on Kazakhstan because it was interesting from a really broad variety of perspectives. One of which was the fact that geographically it sits in between the Western world, the East Asian world, so a border with China, and the Muslim or the Southern world. And so from that perspective, it's despite the fact that it's very empty, it's at the center of three civilizations. So Samuel Huntington had a book that came out around that time called The Clash of Civilizations. And when I read that book, it felt to me as if Kazakhstan was the place to be to understand those dynamics. So I went there in 1994 and lived in a dormitory. And a Soviet dormitory is everything you think it is. Uh, my roommate was a Kazakh guy, and he would go home on weekends and come back with a sheep carcass, and we hung it outside our window. And then when we needed meat, he'd just hack off a hunk of sheep, and we'd fry it up on a homemade hot plate that was essentially clay plugged into copper wires. And half the time when we plugged it in, it shorted out the entire floor of the dormitory. Uh, but
I just have to interject here. Students, do not try that in your dorms, please, please. No, no copper wires and clay hot plates. Wow.
Um, but it was fantastic in that I was in an all Russian, all Kazakh environment all the time. So my language acquisition was fantastic.
Sure.
I had 2 years of Russian study at the University of Washington, but I'm sure a number of your students have studied languages and then tried to go abroad to those countries. It's hard to actually make use of the lessons you've learned, at least initially. But having spent my all my time in that environment where no one spoke English, I really picked up language quite rapidly. And then because there were so few Americans there at that time, I was something of a novelty, and the reception was fantastic. I mean, incredibly warm. You could walk down the street, and people wanted to. Once they figured out I wasn't Russian, they really wanted to meet me and know me and learn about me. Which led to some fantastic adventures. So perhaps the most memorable was I was up at a ski area, and the mountains there are really wonderful. So I was at a ski area and having come back from a mountaineering day, and this tall Russian guy walked in, and he just had the look of an athlete. Just you could see athleticism on him. And so he saw me and came over and started talking to me. He said he was coaching the Kazakh women's national cross country team, and asked if I wanted to go to practice with him. So we ran 10 kilometers down the mountain to the practice area. We watched practice, and that was kind of the basis of our friendship. He turns out he was a mountain climber. And so in the winter, we were climbing 18 and 20,000 foot mountains just outside of Almaty. This guy, his name is Anatoly Bukreyev. And if you've ever read the book Into Thin Air, he was the Russian guy who went out and saved those people on the mountain. And he wanted to hang out with me because he'd never met Americans before, and so wanted to practice his English, but also just dealing with Americans. So I got to climb with this world-class climber, just as a result of being.
Wow. Wow. Part of why I love doing this is that I get to, like, you and I have known each other a little bit for about a year.
Yep.
Had not heard that story, and that's a pretty good one. I also just want to shine a light on something for students, which is that, there's so much fear about being unemployed, and rightfully so. It's economic stress is a real thing, but having periods of lack of plan in place means that you have the freedom to do something and be like, oh, I'm gonna go to Kazakhstan for a period of time and have a new adventure. So um, that's tremendous, Jeff. All right, so we're going to dive a little bit into more some specific public interest technology questions.
Sure.
So as you and I have talked about, in this course, we investigate how we can use science and technology to drive change for the betterment of society. That's kind
Yeah.
of the whole thing that we do here. So tell us about the central idea or purpose of Veritas Maps. Why did you feel it needed to exist? What made you develop it? And also, specific question from one of our students is, what makes it unique or differentiates it from the competition? Like in the marketplace, what makes Veritas different?
Sure. Uh, my interest in mapping is longstanding, and actually, I can at least trace part of that back to Kazakhstan, where the Soviets produced these wonderful maps, absolutely gorgeous pieces of art. So I brought back dozens of maps with me. So I've had this longstanding passion with maps. The first data set that I was exposed to and mapped that really caught my interest was one from the CDC, which was the mortalities and mortality rate from drug overdoses or drug-related deaths. And the first year of the data set was 1999. And so when I first started working with it, it was 2014. Now the data is updated through 2023. And for some reason, it just had this very powerful hold on me because what it depicted was so horrific. So we go back to the very early days of the opioid epidemic, which is, I would date at 1999. There were two centers, one of which was in Appalachia, so Kentucky and West Virginia. The second was a county called Rio Arriba County in New Mexico. And when I dug into Rio Arriba County, it turned out to be a county with a very high percentage of American Indians living there. And the more I read about that, the more I realized that, and was read in the literature, that opioid use was now baked into the culture. And to me, that was very frightening. But what was even more frightening was to watch the spread of opioid deaths originate from those two sources and just permeate the entire country. And particularly in later years, beginning in 2019, the impact of fentanyl is readily visible in that data. So to me, it was fascinating and frightening at the same time. I, I had my sons were born in 2004 and 2007. So looking at that data and thinking about the world that they're growing up in kind of lent this lent urgency to my understanding of this because I wanted to be prepared to protect my sons. Uh, the second kind of motivation was COVID and seeing the way COVID spread across the U.S. was also I was fascinating. So I was using the New York Times data set, which had cases and deaths. And I developed this in such a way that I was seeing things before they were news broadly. And so that was super fun. The next step for me was to put those two data sets together and seeing them as the two large health emergencies facing the US in 2021. Combining them together led to some really interesting discoveries. And then that was kind of the mental leap that it took to say, hey, I could produce an atlas here that allows people to see the same things I'm seeing very, very easily. So the goal then was to combine data sources from many different disciplines and many different areas and produce a platform that required virtually no training and was intuitive and simple to use. So for me, the goal is to get something that's visually striking, that catches interest, conveys information very rapidly and very easily, and is quite intuitive to use. And so those are the three big areas of focus for me as I work on developing Veritas. The reason why I think we're different is because, one, just all the different data sets that I put together, but two, how easy it is to use. And three, the academic rigor with which it was built. So one of the features that I feel pretty proud about is that each data source, I provide the name, a description of the source, a citation where required, and then a link to the data source. So the users can see something within Veritas Maps and instantly go to the data where it came from. Because to me, that type of transparency is really important.
Absolutely. And you've just hit I always feel like I don't need to say anything to the 2620 students, but for the good of the order for people who will be watching this after, I mean, you've just hit on so many things that we talk about as fundamental to public interest technology in general, transparency being one of those, right? We don't just cite our sources to show off that we know our sources. We cite our sources to give someone a pathway to check our work and to show that what we've done has a specific sort of lineage or pathway that's replicable, right? We don't just it's real rigor. The other thing I want to really highlight that you talked about is just how much of scientific exploration, public interest science, starts with observation. We've talked in 2620, I talked with the students about the scientific method as a method really starts with observation first, right? It doesn't start with a hypothesis, it starts with an observation. You see something and you say, whoa, what's going on there? And so what you've described about COVID and opioid overdose, you're just starting with mapping the observations in a systematic way. And it unlocks this entire line of work that you can build and build on, and not just build science on, but build a business on.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And it's that combination to me is exciting. And I kind of feel like Veritas is the culmination of everything that I've done before. My academic experiences, my work experiences, my interests. One thing I didn't mention in the questionnaire that you sent out was how much I love to read and to read fiction and particularly historical fiction. So, the New York Times every Saturday has a quiz. That one is the current news quiz, and then the second is a history quiz where you try and place events in chronological order. And I'm really good at that history quiz because I read so much historical fiction. And it's kind of silly, but at the same time, it gives me a very broad perspective on what has happened in the world over the course of time. And then secondly, I was interested to read that fiction writing has been linked to empathy.
Yes.
Fiction reading, writing, I'm sure, linked to empathy. So I feel like that's true. When I'm reading a book, I can get so deep into it that I forget about the world around me. But the reason why is because I put myself in the shoes of the characters
Yeah.
that are in the book. And that allows me to, I think, when I'm looking at this data, to imagine the stories behind the data. And that's why what I do is so powerful to me, is because I can see the stories and see the truth. And then when I need to learn more, I know what it is I need to focus on.
It's again, empathy is something that we talk about in public interest technology all the time, and also something that these students, we've spent a lot of this semester talking about human-centered design and humanity-centered design. And I mean, that comes up in your work again and again, is the role of empathy, and the role that plays in good product design, the role that plays in good communications and communication design. And it just can't be, it's not just I often joke with my students about, like, I'm not just some old hippie up here talking about empathy, right? Like, empathy is a real tangible skill, and it's really important not just for our humanity, but also to problem solving, right? So that's it's so exciting to hear someone talk about building a business around empathy being a central skill. It's not something we
And
hear a lot of.
it's well, I was on someone asked me to be on a podcast and describe what I do, and one of the questions was, what do you think your most important skill is? And I said empathy, and the guy just got this blank look on his face as if he had no idea what he was talking about, and so it fell really flat with
Whoops.
him. But I persist in this view that it actually is really, really important for what
100%.
we do. Yeah. So
100%.
I'm glad to have found resonance with you.
Absolutely. And I know with our students too, both the ones in the room with us today, but also the folks that are going to see this afterwards. The Battelle Center students um, are empathy hungry, you might say, in terms of a skill set. So we've talked a lot about in our class about how the definition of public interest technology is still emerging. And indeed, just before we started, you were saying that was it was new terminology to you, even though when I was thinking about public interest technology founders, you're one of the first people that's popped into my mind, right? So I love that this is sort of a new term to you. But something that the students have been asked to grapple with a lot is, in your mind, what distinguishes a product or a service as a public interest technology and not just a technology?
One of the reasons why I built Veritas is because I felt as if the world and the United States in particular, there's an increasing lack of common ground or common understanding about what is true and what is fact. And that's related, in my opinion, to social media and the ability to develop silos, which bring in only a very limited portion of the truth or of a story. And the decline of journalism, which held itself, not perfectly, but held itself to a high standard of reporting the truth and separating fact from opinion. And when opinion was delivered, it was also called out as opinion as opposed to facts. And so I wanted to create something that would allow us to agree on what is fact and what is not, and then have an honest discussion about how to drive change. And that's why I chose my sources as being the most credible sources that I could find, and why it made complete sense to cite them and to provide links to them, as we talked about earlier, because unless people have confidence in this data, then we lose the basis for a discussion that can bring people together. And going to the topics that I include in Veritas Maps, it is just basic demographics, but it's also touches climate change and social justice and race and racial variation and imprisonment and women's access to healthcare. I mean, I want to bring together all the topics that we're facing as a nation right now.
The common language and the common sort of factual understanding or common truth. I mean, I love the tagline of Veritas's "Truth Matters," and I love that as a policy scientist. We can have lots of robust discussion, legitimate discussion about different pathways to solve a problem, right?
Yeah.
And there's a huge amount of space for a lot of discussion about which values we dial up and prioritize and all that kind of stuff. But if we can't start from a common language and a common understanding of reality, that's a real hindrance to any real democratic policy making. So
Yes, that's
um,
the case.
actually, I'm just gonna go off book because we have a question from one of the students that I think is relevant right now, which is, do you consider yourself more a businessman or a public interest technologist or something else?
I, I I don't I won't bucket myself as one thing or the other because I'm both. I spent a long time at Microsoft, and I liked Microsoft as a company more than, let's say, other companies because I could see the commitment of Microsoft towards positive change. And it's not perfect, and there are a lot of flaws with Microsoft, but I felt better there than I think I would have felt at other technology companies. I will say that the more time I've spent with working in Veritas, the more I have worked towards public interest. And I kind of joke to myself that I was radicalized by my own data. And and I'll show you what I mean by that when we get into the demo. But the more time I look at this data, the more I realize that there are a lot of problems that I could help with, or at least, allow people to understand better. Uh, and so I felt really more and more strongly that I can achieve a lot of good and positive change with Veritas.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that response. I also don't like being bucketed. And part of it is how you identify in any given setting, right? Is
Yeah,
because sometimes people need you to identify as a business founder and as an
right.
entrepreneur, and sometimes people need you to identify as a public interest technologist or something else.
Yes.
So it's all about
And
the audience.
one of the values of having an organization, Veritas, is quite small, but I have people who tell me that I'm wrong or tell me that I need to look at things from a different perspective. And I, as the leader of Veritas, I want to be the type of leader who is willing to take and seeks out criticism and has colleagues who are open and not fearful in that environment. Because my previous experience as an entrepreneur, culture is incredibly important for an organization and for the success of an organization. And so again, I talked about how what I'm doing now is the culmination of all my past experiences. Part of those experiences include working in companies where culture was deeply flawed, and it led to the demise of those organizations. So I'm able to take from draw from those lessons and apply them to what I'm doing at Veritas.
Yeah. So it's actually a perfect segue to talk just a little bit more about founders. People who build things often make a habit of building things. They've built a
Yeah.
lot of things in their lifetime. So tell us a little bit more about your founder or developer history before Veritas. And you don't have to get into ugly specifics but tell us a little bit more about your background as a founder.
So I was always the kid with the lemonade stand or the lawn mowing business. And my father he grew up on a farm in Eastern Washington. He went to UW, University of Washington, and wanted to be an architect. He was a hick, right? A one horse town and very unsophisticated guy. The dean of the architecture school didn't like him because of that lack of sophistication and told him he would never be an architect. And my dad was just despairing. So he quit and he joined the army and he went and lived in Germany for 2 years and just out of despair. But it was a pivotal moment in his life because Germany opened him up to all the wonders of Europe, the history, the architecture, the food, the wine, uh, and he came back inspired uh, and adaptable. So he went back to the UW. He entered the school of construction uh, and became a general contractor. But he was very design minded general contractor, and he ended up being quite good at what he did. When I think back to that founding, it was an example for me that you
Mm.
can, out of adversity, you can build great things. And so I founded a company in 2002 that that filters wine, so a very advanced filtration system. And I founded a partner, and we were the first mobile filtration system in Oregon. And it was a super successful company. After 5 years, I sold it to the operator. So I was kind of the funding guy. And I
Yeah.
sold it to the operator. And now his company is big. It employs 20 people. He's really built something wonderful from it. I've always wanted to do different things and to apply myself to different ideas.
Yeah.
So when I left Microsoft, I left because, well, my last job at Microsoft, you touched on. I was working for the Power BI development team, and my role there was to work with customers to help them use Power BI successfully. And what that meant in practice was that I was traveling around the world, spending 2 to 3 weeks with customers, working with leadership to help them conceptualize what they wanted from analytics, and then to start to put that into place. And so I was in Germany and Thailand and Singapore and Australia and Spain, just all over the place. I even went to Lebanon for 3 weeks. Uh, it was the funnest job I had. It was really wonderful. I was also presenting 2 or 3 times a week when I was in Redmond to companies that would come and spend a week at the executive briefing center. So I was a subject matter expert on how finance at Microsoft was using Power BI and advanced analytics to drive the business. And so I did over 500 of these presentations. And it was fantastic because it was 500 conversations that I had with leaders of organizations on what analytics meant to them, what the challenges that they faced, and what they were seeking. And that in part contributed to my building of Veritas. One of those presentations was to a hospital group. They were accompanied by a Seattle startup that was doing AI within the healthcare space. And this was in 2018 and 2019. It was actually 2017 is when they started, but they were creating predictive models for various elements of patient treatment. So one really useful combination was a prediction engine around the risk of readmission for patients when they're released from the hospital. That was paired with a prediction around the length of stay. So what's the right amount of time to keep people in the hospital after a procedure, for example. And by combining those two, we were trying to get to an optimal time to release the patient where they're well enough to leave. We're not keeping them longer, so reducing the risk of hospital-acquired infections, for example.
Right.
And it was a fantastic concept. They spent 6 months talking me into joining them. So I left Microsoft and joined this company, and it was fun because it was a combination of clinicians. So there were doctors and nurses on staff. There were computer scientists. There were computer engineers. So
Mm.
because we were dealing with huge amounts of data, and there were data scientists. So there were these three groups that all needed to cooperate in order to be successful. And then I was layered on as the vice president of analytics. My remit was to build a team of analysts who could do two things. One is analyze all the data that was coming in from hospital systems and provide them just a means of understanding what's going on. But the second was to build tools that customers could use to understand the predictive results. And it was really fun. It was progressing quite well until COVID hit. And then two things happened. One, all the customers left because they couldn't afford the time or the money.
Yeah.
But two, the cultural flaws that had been in the background of this company and covered up by the rapid growth. And it was really painful to watch that fall apart, but it was a great experience in terms of lessons that I bring to building my own startup.
Yeah. That's thank you so much for sharing that, Jeff, because it just hits on so many things that we talk about with students, not just in class, but in at a lot of our Battelle Center events is the importance to try. We often say failure is a gift, and failure is learning. And like I'm sure you would not characterize your time at that company as failure, but rather as a great experience of that contributes to everything that you're doing, right? Or if you're like me, I tell students all the time I like to fail 3 times a day. So I actually don't think failure is a bad term at all.
Right.
And you know, I'm hungry for it because it's how you learn. But oh my God, so much to unpack there that we could talk about specifically. But travel and empathy, two things that came up a lot
Right. Yeah.
in that story. Um, I asked you in our sort of pre-interview to tell us about your first memory of building or making or creating something new, and this story it just ripped my heart right out. So I want you to share this story with the students if you would.
Sorry, remind me.
This about building the table.
Oh, yes. So I'd mentioned that my first trip overseas was going to Japan to stay with a family. And I'd been taking a woodworking course at school. And so I already knew that the student whose family I would be staying with, so he'd spent a month with me. And we developed this really strong friendship. And so I wanted to bring something special back for him. So and I really loved woodworking. So I mentioned my dad was a general contractor, so I grew up kind of in the basement helping my dad with projects, and I was pretty good at it. And so I wanted to bring in something that I had built myself, but that would fit inside a Japanese home. So it would have a Japanese aesthetic. It would be small, something that I could pack in my suitcase. So I designed this little table that had it was maybe 1 foot by 2 feet, or maybe slightly bigger, but it had legs that I could unscrew and then packed flat in my suitcase. So I spent 3 months just every day going in after school to work on this table, and it was gorgeous. I mean, just this beautiful little table. And I brought it, and I went into a room by myself at the family's house, built it put it back together in 10 minutes, and brought it out. And they just couldn't believe that an American would come up with this, particularly an American kid, uh, something so special and unique. 30 years later, I was in contact with the boy whom I'd stayed, and he panned around with his phone and he showed me the table that was still in his apartment in Tokyo. And it was cool.
I mean, I'm an old sap, I guess, but
Right?
boy, that story just cut me right to the bone. Yeah, people who build like to build. We build forever. We build all the time. We can't stop building. Right.
Well, yeah. So a silly little example is uh, this is called a dorodongo,
Okay.
and it's a Japanese art form. This is just a ball of dirt that comes from my family's vineyard down in Oregon. So during harvest, I'm usually down there by myself because my wife is staying here with our boys. So at nights, there's just nothing to do. And but I saw this video on making Durango, so I went out to the vineyard and I scraped up some. The dirt at the vineyard is very unique soil.
Yeah.
So I scraped some up, and then this is probably 10 hours of labor to create this ball. But it was just so satisfying because it was so simple, right? I was just with my hands putting this together and trying to get it as round as possible. And it's also kind of the pursuit of perfection, but in a very small and manageable package.
Yeah.
Uh, so
It's meditative, right?
yes, that's exactly right.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I want to ask you about sort of this last thing, and then I want you to show us a demo, whatever you want to show us of Veritas Maps. I know the students are really eager to see it.
Okay.
But I asked you what your super talent or your superpower is and how you figured that out, and I just love your response. But if you wouldn't mind, tell us what you consider or not your super talent or your superpower.
Yeah, and my answer was that I don't have one. Uh,
I would agree with that. I think you have many, but go on.
so my response was I don't think I have a superpower, but I have a collection of skills that, when put together, become powerful. And those skills are what I say when Veritas is kind of the culmination of everything that I've done before. So we've talked about empathy. We've talked about uh, organizational design and organizational build, analytical skills. So my role in finance at Microsoft was all analytics.
Yeah.
I was a business analyst more than I was, say, an accountant.
Right.
Uh, it's visualization and and a passion for visualization. I love to design things that facilitate understanding, and I really came to that skill when I spent 5 years in Germany, and I was running all of the finance teams in Microsoft International for the services business. So again, it was based in Germany, but I was traveling essentially all over the world working with these finance teams. I came back to Redmond and my role changed dramatically. So I was the business partner for the newly hired vice president of sales for services. So he had to sell $5 billion worth of services to Microsoft customers. And he was very different from the rest of the services leadership team in that he was not analytical. So most executives at Microsoft are super analytical. They can look at a spreadsheet and know exactly what's going on, within a minute.
Yeah.
He was not that guy. And so he came in and it was really hard for him to adjust to this very analytical environment because he was a total sales guy. So I decided to try and help him, and I created a storyboard. So on an 11 by 17 piece of paper, I had 12 different graphs, and under each graph, I had 3 sentences describing what that graph was talking about. And so I did that every month for him. And all of a sudden, he could go into leadership meetings and speak eloquently about what was going on in his business because of the way in which the data was presented to him.
Yeah.
And that was my first real insight into how powerful data visualization could be. And it was so effective that the guy that was running all of services asked me to do the same thing for him so that he could take it to the COO of Microsoft every month and tell services story. And so when Microsoft came out with Power BI, I was a very early adopter because to me it was such a great tool. And because I'm not technical, right? I can't write code. I can kind of do SQL, but not really. Because it was not a technical tool, it gave me so much power and so much freedom to do things that before I was reliant on IT for. So it just opened up the world for me in terms of the capabilities it brought and then matching with what I knew how to do. I know that was kind of a segue, but putting together doing all of these different things, these seemingly random things, actually they come together and produce a package that makes me capable of doing what I'm doing.
I love that so much for so many reasons. I want to ask you to go ahead and share your screen and bring up a
Right?
demo. And while you do that, I just want to tell students, point out that when you said, you think that it's a mix of all of these skills together that sort of gives you this ability to do something exceptional. And I just kept thinking about how we've talked about complexity science and system science in class and how the phrase "other than the sum of the parts," or that's the true translation of it, but more than the sum of the parts is the more common interpretation. But that happens with skills too, right? We don't have individual skills. The real power in acquiring those skills is that the combination of them allows you to do really novel and creative things that you can't just list on a resume, right? You are able to acquire them and demonstrate them in unique ways.
Yeah.
So show us, Jeff.
All right. But this is the part I really love. So uh, this is Life in America. So this is a county level platform. And this is where I've gathered together all these different data sources. We're seeing two things here. One is a map. And then the second on the left side is a list of, I call them domains, but they're groupings of metrics. So the map defaults to mean elevation at the county level. And I like to start with this because it doesn't take very long for particularly Americans to look at this and be oriented because we see the low-lying coastal areas on the East Coast and Gulf Coast, you can see Appalachia, the Mississippi River Delta, and then the Rocky Mountains. So it's kind of a very quick orientation. This is a 3D view. I also have a state view and a flat view. So most of the time I spend in this flat view, but there are definitely times when the 3D view makes a ton of sense. To select a metric, on the left side, we open up the domain. And so you can see I have the +2 open. So we open up this plus, and then this summary facts are a collection of metrics that provide an overview of perhaps the most commonly sought for metrics. So I'm covering population, age, race, rural, percentage rural, marriage, poverty, education, income, COVID, the National Risk Index, which comes from FEMA and talks about climate vulnerability, et cetera. So to select a metric, we can simply look at poverty. And so the red counties show where poverty is worst. The blue counties show where poverty is lowest. To assist the user, I create this little measure up here that says red is a higher value and a worse outcome. If I were to select a different metric, so if we look at the percentage rural, unless you want to be very ideologically extreme, there's not a good or a bad associated with this. It's just a fact. So in this instance, blue is a higher value or a better outcome. We're looking at a higher value. The third type of metric is one where a higher value is a better value. So I would say that education is a positive thing. So in this case, blue is a better outcome. And so this shows where people are more educated. And you'll notice that when we look at poverty, it was highest in the South. When we look at education, it's also lowest in the South. Yeah. To switch to a different group of measures, we'll close up summary facts and then open up, say, health risk behaviors. So what this says is the data source is CDC places, and we're looking at health risk behaviors is this grouping of metrics. So when I open this up, we can look at current smoking and see that smoking takes place through Appalachia up into Missouri and then down through Louisiana. Now, when I first rendered this map, it was so surprising to me when I selected binge drinking because it's a completely different part of the country. And I just had no idea that people drank this much up in these northern states. One of the things that I built that I think is unique is the ability to combine metrics. So when I combine smoking and drinking, what I'm doing is I'm creating an on-the-fly index of the 3,000 counties in the US and then ranking them for the combination of smoking and drinking. And some areas pop out here. So one is where you guys are in Ohio, there's a large, significant combination of smokers and drinkers there. You also see Nevada jumping out and then Indiana as those states. So when we move to the state map, this becomes clear. So if I select just smoking and then we go to the state map, these are the red states are where smoking is highest, binge drinking, these northern tier states, and then combine the two. And then we see Ohio and Missouri and Iowa jumping in. So having these different map views facilitates deeper insight. The simpler view makes the overall observation more understandable. One of the most powerful data sets that I have is a data set that is produced by a professor at Middlebury named Caitlin Myers. And she has a team of graduate students who track the distance that a woman has to travel to get an abortion. And they've done it all the way back to 2009. So I just benchmark through 2009 every year. So in 2009, the average distance a woman had to travel to receive an abortion was 23.7 miles, so 24 miles. You can see that in North Dakota, the distance was pretty long, 300 miles, but that for most of the US, it was not that far. It stayed relatively steady up until the rendering of the Dobbs decision, which was June of 2022. So in July, many states had trigger laws that went into effect automatically. And you can see this immediate jump from 28 miles to 56 miles. And the spread all the way down to Texas.
Yeah.
If we jump ahead to the last month of the data set so far, July 2024, and now it's spread broadly across the South. In the southern tip of Texas, it's 765 miles that one has to travel for
Wow.
this medical treatment. Uh,
Wow.
and this, I mean, to see 26 to 84 is pretty valuable. But to see this on a map and how quickly it will change allows the narrative to form and take place and become much
Yeah.
more. Another, I think, really fascinating storyline is COVID. So COVID, the first case of COVID was actually in Snohomish County, which is just, Snohomish County, which is just north of my county, King County. So it was right home. And this was in January of 2020. In February, there was very little change. But in March, there was this explosion across the country. And if we switch to the 3D view here, there are a number of counties that stand out. So one is New York, where because interestingly, flights were canceled from Asia, but they were not canceled from Europe.
Yeah.
So all these flights from Europe were coming into New York and spreading it there. But the other place it was really spreading was Blaine County, Idaho. And interestingly, my family, we have a vacation house in Blaine County, Idaho. And so I was thinking in March of 2020, maybe we should go there because it's much smaller. We'll get out of the city. But then I looked and I saw how high it was in Blaine County. I was like, forget it. But the other counties that are showing up as high are Summit County, Utah,
Hmm.
Teton County, Wyoming, Gunnison County, Colorado, and Eagle County, Colorado. Now, Lisa, do you have any idea what these counties have in common?
I'm gonna guess ski towns, ski
Exactly
resort.
right. That's exactly right. These are all ski towns. So people were flying in from all over the US to go skiing, and they were bringing COVID with them, leading to these outbreaks. Uh,
I just have to interrupt here and point out to folks that I've had the pleasure of seeing a lot of this before, and I remember looking at this with our postdoc Lauren Ducey, and you walking us through the COVID cases, and this is a case where data visualization folks, we hate it when people over engineer a visualization, right? Don't show me in 3 dimensions when the third dimension doesn't add anything and it just produces noise. These are the kind of data, case data, death data are the same. We're seeing the third dimension is like you just can't communicate it in 2 dimensions with color, right? It is so much more startling when you see it in this third dimension. So for any budding data visualization folks out there, I just want to highlight this as a great example of using a third dimension on a data viz.
yeah. And that's exactly right. There are many elements within this list where 3D doesn't make a ton of sense, but it absolutely makes a lot of sense here.
Yeah.
Uh, the other thing that I draw from this data set is how dynamic the virus was. So in June of 2021, it was 116 per 100,000, and you can see most of the country is blue. There are a few isolated red zones. But watch what happens as the Delta. Sorry, this was super interesting, right? This is COVID spreading up the Mississippi River
Yep.
here, right? It's fascinating. But watch how rapidly it expands with Delta and then dies down very rapidly. And then with Omicron, it's even faster. So Omicron jumps up and covers the entire country,
Yeah.
and then dies down very, very rapidly. And this shows how dynamic COVID was. And if, say, bird flu makes the jump from animal transmission to human transmission, how rapidly it could sweep the US.
That's
Uh,
right.
and I've never seen data shown like this before about COVID that to me is so alarming, right? I mean, to me, the story is here and you can see it so easily.
And again, it starts with the observation, right? So,
Yeah.
we say to students all the time, show, don't tell. Like, if you can show the phenomenon, if you can show the observation, it is so much more powerful because it resonates with people not just on a rational sort of intellectual or cognitive level, but on an emotional level as well. It
Yeah.
just you can show it, you can make people feel it, and that's so much more effective.
So Lisa, I mentioned earlier about how I was radicalized by my own dad.
Yes.
Let me show you some of what that meant. So
Yeah.
I have this page called Top N, and what it allows me to do is to look either at the top or the bottom, 20, 50, 100, or 250 counties. And so I found this to be really useful. I need to upgrade this visual, but I don't want to. Uh, I found it really useful to isolate counties. So if we look at the 100 top counties when it comes to poverty, so the highest poverty rates, three areas really jump out to me. One is Appalachia, where the drug epidemic started. The second is this region in the South. So one area is the Mississippi side of the Mississippi River. A
Mhm.
second region is this band of counties going through kind of southern Alabama. And when I followed up and read in greater detail about these counties, they are in a region which is called the Black Belt of Alabama. And the reason why is because the soil in this part of Alabama was very conducive towards growing cotton. And as early as the mid 1700s, there were plantations here. They required huge amounts of labor. So this is where slaves were concentrated. One, on the Mississippi River, which is a means of transporting slaves up and down, but two, for these big plantations in Alabama and Georgia. So if we then look at the percentage uh, Black population, exactly these same areas, right? So 250 years after the reason for bringing all these people to live here has passed, they're still living there, which was to me really interesting. And then going back to poverty,
Yeah.
these regions up in the Dakotas and down in New Mexico and Arizona, these are where the big Indian reservations are, the big Native American reservations. So poverty is afflicting African Americans, Native Americans, and people living in Appalachia. So three very distinct areas. And this is what really caught my eye. This is where I began to start to see that structural racism was readily visible in these maps. And we could also, the value of putting together so many different data sets is that it becomes really easy to see patterns. So this is the percentage of the vote that was Democratic in 2020. And you can see these areas in Mississippi and Alabama and in Maryland, as well as the Native American reservations, are also super high. Or if I switch to the bottom 100 and then look at the percentage of women married as the lowest, the same areas pop up. And so to me, the low marriage rates talk about a society that is not as coherent as perhaps it might be.
Hmm.
So this really got me started thinking. And then I came to this scatter plot, which is looking at, so I have four different axes, four different metrics that I am viewing on this scatter plot. So the y-axis is the percentage in poverty. The x-axis is the prevalence of coronary heart disease.
Yeah.
The third axis, the size of the bubble, is the percentage of the population that's American Indian, Alaska Native. And then the color is per capita income. So blue indicates the highest income, red indicates the lowest income, size of the circle, how many Native Americans live in that county. And all of these counties are counties in South Dakota or North Dakota or Alaska or Montana or Arizona where there are large Native American populations. And what really, I guess, pissed me off when I first started seeing this was if I switched to COPD or to diabetes or to stroke or asthma or high blood pressure or obesity, the Native American counties they don't move, right? They're in the same position.
Yeah.
And and as I looked at then the map where Native Americans lived and where they used to live, it 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 felt to me as if we were not only seeing structural racism, we were also seeing ethnic cleansing
Yeah.
or genocide. And so looking at this, I resolved to learn much more about the state of American Indian Alaska Native affairs and to really educate myself. So I'm taking a course at the Native Nations Institute of the University of Arizona called Rebuilding Native Nations. I'm engaging with academics there, and I'm building analytics based on reservation data only. So this is called Native Economic Trends, and this is looking at the census tract level, and it's very granular, but it allows us to understand all different kinds of metrics about Native Americans. And I'm speaking with an organization called Village Earth, which is an NGO dedicated towards social, but also land justice for Native Americans. I want to donate this tool to them because I think so much it can be so powerful in terms of driving change. But I mean, look at this. So Native Americans in the before settlers headed west lived all across the West. I mean, everywhere. And look at, I mean, a state like Colorado, there are no reservations except down here in the Southwest. Or Wyoming, there's only the Wind River Reservation. Or Nebraska, there's only these reservations largely connected with the Sioux tribes. Or in Kansas, I mean, virtually nothing. And to me, this feels like it indeed was ethnic cleansing, that they were shipped out. And I've never, in the literature that I've read, I've not seen that term used, but it feels applicable to me now.
And it's also I mean here and also I think it shines a light on the fact that you've invested in sort of this tool, this business of Veritas Maps and a set of tools um, that advances justice and autonomy and self-determination and really can be used to advance human rights, broadly speaking.
Yep.
And that's actually not in competition with business. It's actually could be quite good for business, right?
Right.
So um,
Yes.
thank you so much for showing us this. Jeff, there is a question from a student just asking if have you made maps outside of the US, maps for other regions or countries in the world?
Yes. So I have four country studies: Brazil, India, Nigeria, and Kenya. I've also built out, let me come to uh, I've also built out a really fascinating study using World Bank data, uh,
Oh,
which is great because it's longitudinal. And so some of the data goes as far back as 1960, all of it, at least at 2000 or earlier. So having that longitudinal data is really fascinating. And then the United Nations has uh, a massive project called Sustainable Development Goals, where there are 16 different goals tackling poverty and hunger and clean water and clean air, social justice, et cetera. For each of those, they have an accompanying data set, and I built out a study for those as well. So, yeah, I can show those. So this is some of what we have. So this is Life America login. One project that I'm working on is AI Assist, which is we can type in questions in three ways. One is based on what we're seeing on the map. So you can just type in a general question. It will go to ChatGPT and provide answers from the internet. The other two ways are to analyze map metrics, and it will export the data from the map as it's displayed, have ChatGPT analyze it, and then provide commentary. And then the third is to suggest map metrics, where it will if we look at a metric like coronary heart disease, it will look at other metrics that are related or are correlated in some way. So it's not perfect yet. We're still in development, but it's four people with no expertise who are building this on our own like that. Just super proud of this.
that's
Uh,
great. And
Yeah.
again, just sort of like the excitement of curiosity and creativity and the act of building, right? Like
Yes.
let's start working on it. Jeff, we could look at this. I know I could look at this all day, and I suspect actually a lot of students could too. Oh, we have another uh oh yeah, so maybe we'll get to that one. Okay, quickly. We'll do this one quickly. This is a good question. Um, one of the students says that they'd love to hear your thoughts on the pros of and cons of staying at the same company for such a long time, being at Microsoft for 20 plus years. What were the pros and the cons of being there for a long time?
One of the pros was how opportunity expanded the longer I was there.
Ah,
And as I as I gained a professional reputation within the country, but also expanded my skill sets, I was able to do more and more. So shortly after I joined, so I joined in 2000. In 2004, my wife and I moved to Singapore, and we spent 2 years living in Singapore. That was really great for us, my wife and I, because I met her at business school, but she's Singaporean. So to spend 2 years with her family, understanding where she came from, it was fantastic. But it also kind of established me as someone who could perform well internationally. So in 2008, I went on my second overseas tour, which was based in Munich. So it was 5 years in Munich, progressing through a couple of different jobs there. And then by developing very strong analytical skills, I was able to move out of finance and into product development. And that's a pretty rare move, but it
yeah,
was super fun. Like I loved the totally different environment, being able to pick up new skills and surrounded by really, really smart people, like technically brilliant people. So
yeah,
definitely advantage to moving two different companies, I think, because you do get different skills and you get exposed to different cultures. At the same time, I mean, Microsoft is a fantastic company to work for. So I don't feel as if I did myself a disservice by staying there that long.
yeah. Um, we have already taken so much of your time, so can we do a quick speed round before I let you go?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. Um, favorite sci-fi media? Book, movie, show, series, whatever you want. Probably for you a book, but it doesn't have to be.
You know what? I would say traditionally a book, but my wife and kids really like to watch Netflix series
Yeah.
and tended towards sci-fi or supernatural stuff. And at first I was a little dismissive, but it was just so much fun sitting with them and watching it together that for now, at the moment, it's a series.
Yeah. So what is it? Can you tell us?
My wife and I just finished watching Wednesday.
Oh yeah. I love Wednesday.
Yeah, which was super fun.
What about worst advice or best advice, either way, that you've ever gotten about creativity or innovation?
Uh, well, yeah, we shouldn't change because this is the way we've always done it.
Oh God.
Uh,
Worst reason to do anything ever.
and this was from my manager at Microsoft when I wanted to use Power BI in finance to help in the monthly rhythm. And she said, no, we just stick with Excel and PowerPoint. And it made me crazy. Like it just infuriated me. Another piece of horrible advice, not around building stuff, but around finding a job, was get married.
Oh.
So someone told me to get married, and I, I, I didn't get up and leave. I wanted to, and I never wanted to work at that place again. I
Yeah.
never wanted to work at that place. Like it just turned me off so radically.
Yeah.
And
How
then,
about don't weigh in on people's personal lives? That's
right.
a good rule of thumb in business. So what's a question? Well, this is a big question and we're short on time, but what's a question that you have for me? Do you want to
So
pose it to me?
yeah, so I was I consider myself like a liberal arts major, not a science major, not a tech
Yeah.
major. And I've been reading quite a bit about the decline of people studying liberal arts in universities. What is your view as an educator and as a mother, perhaps,
Yeah.
about the value of liberal arts studies and liberal arts degrees for an individual, but also for society?
Yeah. So I love this question, and I could talk about it for hours. But to me, what it really boils down to is that liberal arts is fundamentally about becoming a what Scott Page refers to as a many model thinker. That when you get trained in a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different ways about thinking about the world, and that's fundamentally what liberal arts is, and some of that's humanities training, and some of that's social science training, and some of that's STEM thinking. That you can't help but become someone who thinks about the world using a bunch of different mental models, right? So you think about different types of problems in different ways of framing problems, um, and different conceptual models of why those problems might happen, right? And that's just what liberal arts education does for you, is that you become someone who holds a bunch of different models in your head, and so your toolbox isn't one model for thinking about problems in the world and how to solve them. Your toolbox is a whole hardware store of ways of thinking about those problems. And so I think that that sort of critical transdisciplinary thinking is so instrumental to the creativity that we need to tackle wicked problems, that I think it's a total loss that we've sort of undersold the value of the liberal arts and the humanities. I mean, I have told folks this before, but I was trained first as an anthropologist as an undergrad, and then as an epidemiologist. And so then when I came to public policy and organizational studies, I think about the world like an epidemiologist and an anthropologist first. And that has allowed me to see things that I don't think I would have seen
Sure.
without that training. So it's a great question, Jeff.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks. And I
Um,
thought you were a great person to answer it. So
Thanks, I appreciate that. So last thing is I want to ask you to give, I love homework. I love when people give me homework. I give myself homework all the time. Students may feel differently about that, but they'll eventually come around on the value of homework. So could you give these students, please, a homework assignment, something to do, something to read, something to build, listen to, participate in? You're an avid reader, so maybe that's your thing, but anything that you say, I want you guys to go out and do this.
so I mentioned my son at UW Computer Science. He's taking a data visualization course, and for the first time in his academic career, I can actually help him with a course. So one of the first projects they got in this data visualization course was to create two views. One is a view which is intended to be a true rendering of uh, of data. So one that gives you an accurate understanding and accurate picture of what's being shown. The second is to use the same data but render it in such a way as to be deceptive.
Oh,
And I love this assignment, and I had tons of examples that I could pull out of Veritas Maps that could go either way. Uh, and so to me, the assignment that I would say is read the newspaper of your choice, but I rely a lot on Washington Post and the New York Times, where because they use a lot of tremendous data visualizations, is try to find examples where you believe it's an honest rendering of data or where it leads to a skewed understanding based on the way the data visualization is constructed.
that's great. I love that homework assignment. It's the kind of thing now I'm going to fold that into my curriculum, Jeff, where I'm just going to make them do that all the
Okay.
time. So again, for anyone who's interested in learning more about Veritas Maps and seeing demos of the incredible tools and capabilities that it has, Jeff has those embedded in Veritas Maps. They've got little demo videos that you can through. You can also sign up for a free trial and all sorts of stuff. So veritasmaps.com. Follow Jeff on LinkedIn. And I'm so excited that he showed off a little bit of the Native Nations tool that he's been building, the economic data in particular. It's just tremendous work that he's been doing. Jeff, you mentioned the centrality of empathy and commitment to human dignity as essential skills. We like to refer to those not soft skills, right? They're power skills, and they drive your work. And those just show up so well in the development of all the work that you've been doing at Veritas Maps. But I also really appreciate your generosity. We've only known each other for about a year, but in that time, you've shared time and energy and expertise with me and with the Batal Center network, including members of our team who are building a Power BI tool. You've just been very generous with your time and your expertise, and I really appreciate that about you so much. So thank you for that.
It's really been my pleasure, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
So thank you again so much for joining us and for sharing your curiosity and your passion and your dedication with our students and our audience, Jeff. I so appreciate it. I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it, Lisa. Thanks
Thanks
very much.
so much.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers. Okay. Michael, I think we're done. Students, great. Thank you. I know that was a long conversation, but based on questions, I hope you guys really valued it. And I will see you all on Friday.